Okay, Shavua Tov, everybody. I want to, before we jump in tonight's all night for our Hasidut class, because you probably don't know this, but we've been working through this book. I may have mentioned it one other time. It's called Major Trends in Hasidism. And it's by Dr. Pesach Schindler and Shmuel Rosenberg. It's one that they created for use at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And so we've been using it to kind of get a taste of all of the early Hasidic rabbis, and we have, for the most part, gone through all of them. For right now, we skipped Rabbi Menachem of Bratslav. He deserves, in a lot of ways, a little more time, and I need more time to truly understand him. But tonight, we are on the last two of the early Hasidic rabbis, Simcha Bunim of Pisha and Menachem Mendel of Kotzker. So Menachem Mendel of Kotzker is the latest of the early Hasidic rabbis that we're going to study. He was born in 1787 and died in 1859. That's not that long ago when you think about the beginning of the Hasidic movement. Compare that to the very first, the one that started it all, the Baal Shem Tov. He was born in the year 1700 and died in 1760. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotzker was born 27 years after the Baal Shem Tov died. So the last, as far as I can tell, the last Hasidic rabbi during the lifetime of the Baal Shem Tov was Rabbi Naftali of Rovshitz. Everybody else, Nachman of Bratslav, Rabbi Shalom of Bel, Simcha Bunim, and Menachem Mendel of Kotzker, were all born after his death. And so tonight we're going to study those last two, Simcha Bunim and now, you might have actually heard about the a famous teaching from Reb Simcha Bunim, and we'll start with that because I think you'll recognize it. Man always have two pockets. In one of them shall lie the saying, I am dust and ashes. In the other, the saying, for me the world was created. Now, raise your hand if you've heard this already. You know this is a great teaching because it's become ubiquitous in the Jewish world, which is, and I'll rephrase it here, that one should always, in pockets, carry around with them a physical reminder of these two things. On the one hand, we are dust and ashes. We come from the ground, to the ground we're going to return. On the other hand, for me, the world was created. Here you are, in body and soul, and that's special. There's something about being here that is inherently holy. Without you, the world would be incomplete. The picture of the universe would not be as it is now, and God being, create as our creator, who made this world, decided that you belong in it. And Reb Simcha Bunim asks us to carry around both of these. He says in our pockets, but really in our hearts. We are dust and ashes. On the other hand, the world was created for us. And that's a good for humility, of course. When we get too haughty, when we think too much of ourselves, and you pull out the piece of paper that says, I am dust and ashes. What I also love about this is it's not just about humility, it's also about those moments when we need to be brought up, when we're feeling so low that we can't do the will of God, when we're feeling so low that we can't bring our potential. Then you take out the other paper that says, for me, the world was created. And through those two tools, Reb Simcha Bunim says, this is all you need to bring out your best self into the world. When you get too high, remember, I am dust and ashes. And when you feel down low, you pull it out and you say, for me, the world was... I'll share one more teaching from Rebbe Simcha Bunim before we go to the Kotzker Rebbe. He writes, there is a story of the man who had made all of the preparations for his wedding, but provided himself with a wedding ring. Likewise, the one who all of their life in the affairs of this world, but pays no heed to the needs of their soul, is like this person. So what he's saying here is, imagine somebody who gets ready for their wedding. How long it takes to get ready. They cook the food, they get the space ready, and they get to the chuppah for the big moment, and she realizes that they forgot the ring. This is like somebody, he says, who just pays attention to her worldly affairs, but no needs of what his or her soul needs. So what I love about this teaching is Reb Simcha Bunim is pointing out that the needs of our body, like the worldly affairs we take part in, are very important as a stepping stone to God. In the same way that in order to really enjoy a wedding, one has to get everything ready. The food has to be ready. The space has to be ready. They need the right clothes. Of course, they could do a wedding without all of these things, but what's a wedding, without the proper preparation? We prepare our world in a way where we can connect to God. We wear clothes that honor us. We keep our space clean. We treat our coworkers with kindness. We get our whole life in order as foundation. Now, that is not enough to truly connect to God, says Reb Simcha Bunim. What is to ask yourself, what does my soul need? Once your body has all its needs taken care of, once your worldly affairs are in order, then if you want to connect to God, if you want to achieve this goal of devekut, of being close to God in every moment of one's day, then the next step is to ask, what does my soul need? I think for each of us it's probably different, though I think there are some overlapping elements. Prayer, tzedakah, maybe just the big three from the high holidays. Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. Repentance, which is looking back on one's deeds and improving them, seeking forgiveness where necessary. Tefillah, prayer, reaching out to God, to the universe, to that higher being. And tzedakah, and giving, at least those three, I think, overlap, address the needs of our soul. But the world of business, of our worldly affairs, it's an important stepping stone to achieve that. And if we ignore that, then it's like the other side of this teaching. If we ignore that, then it's like with only the ring, where you're under the chuppah and you're getting married, but you don't have the clothes, you don't have a meal ready. That too is no way to get married, so to speak. You need both. Your worldly affairs taken care of, and your soul affairs taken care of. Okay, so now I'm going to go to Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotzker, and I want to start with this teaching. Remember, he is our latest early Hasidic rabbi, and I love this teaching because you can imagine him maybe having, in his youth, some memory of the first Hasidim. Like when he was a kid, he might have been studying with people who actually, saw the Baal Shem Tov, knew the Maggid of Mezrich, the one that really began to spread Hasidism. And this is a teaching of his that I love. He says, when the report reached Rabbi Menachem Mendel that an apparatus had been invented for the heating of the water of the mikveh, the mikveh is a ritual bath that traditionally men and women go to in order to transform themselves from a state of impurity to a state of purity. Women use it after their periods. Men and women use it, before Shabbat. It's a well-known tradition that it's a well-known Hasidic tradition to go to the mikveh before Shabbat, before Yom Kippur, before all the holidays, so that you enter the upcoming holiday in a state of purity. So he says, a report reached Menachem Mendel that an apparatus had been invented for the heating of water. And Rabbi Mendel said, generations of warm-hearted Jews had frequented cold mikvaot, and now generations of cold-hearted Jews will have warm mikvaot. Ouch! You can imagine here his critique at the Jews that he's seeing. Remember, he is still connected to this generation of Hasids. And he sees maybe a deterioration of the spirit of, the Hasidic ideal, that began with the Baal Shem Tov. And he says that apparatus for warming up the mikveh, it's not a good thing inherently. What it means is that we don't care so much about the actual goal of what we're doing, but it's the physical comforts that have to come along with it. If it's not comfortable, then it's not, and it's not easy to do, then it's not worth pursuing, perhaps. And Menachem Mendel says that's totally contradictory to the goal of what I'm trying to do and what we're trying to do as a Hasidic community, which is connecting to God. And if you need a warm mikveh to do that, then it means that your heart is getting cold. Whereas generations of warm-hearted Jews looking to connect to God could care less about the temperature of the water. And they would happily get into a cold mikveh in order to achieve a feeling of unity and closeness with God. He also teaches, Reb Mendel said once to his followers, I want you to abstain, not because it's forbidden to sin, but simply for lack of time. Here, I love this sentiment, which is to say, yes, it's forbidden to sin, but that's not why Reb Mendel wants us not to. He says because we have so little time in this world that if we spend it sinning, we are wasting the precious moments that we have here. So go and do the work you need to do in order to achieve your potential. Don't waste the... Another teaching. And this is about, this is coming Numbers. We're reading the book about Midbar now. This is chapter 1333. He comments on the verse, and we were in our own hoppers, and so we were in their sight. In this moment in the Torah, Moses sends spies to the land of Canaan in order to see if the cities are going to be easy to conquer, what the inhabitants are like, what the produce is like, because the Israelites at this moment are this close to going and inheriting the land of Israel. And so these 12 spies go, and 10 of them come back saying that the inhabitants of the land are huge and will never beat them. They say these words, that we were in our own sight like grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. And this is what Rabbi Menachem Mendel says. He says, this was one of the sins of the spies. We can understand them saying, and we were in our own eyes as grasshoppers. But why did they say, and so we were in their sight? Why should you care how others see you? Says the Kotzker Rebbe. If you're living a life that you are proud of, that you know every moment of the day you are asking yourself, what am I doing to elevate this world? How am I connecting with God? How am I bringing God into this world? And you feel like the choices you make, the mitzvot you're keeping, even though others think that, think anything about it. Rabbi Menachem Mendel says it does not matter. Live a life that you're proud of. Live a life that where you're serving God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. And if you do that, the next step, he says, is do not care what others think about you. Now, I want to read a comment in here. So there's a commentary every now and then from the people who put this curriculum together, from the rabbis, Dr. Pesach Schindler and Shmuel Rosenberg. They write, he says, this is a typical Kotzker observation, because the true chassid should think only of doing his or her duty and pleasing God. Why should one be at all bothered about the opinions others have of him? This attitude led other Hasidim to speak of the Kotzker Hasidim as ruffians, indifferent to all social graces. No doubt the Kotzker Hasidim admitted to this charge and were delighted by it. So this sentiment was so infused into the culture of the Kotzker Hasidim that even amongst Hasidim, this group was considered, Pesach Schindler writes here, ruffians and completely indifferent to social graces. And they found deep spiritual fulfillment in that. Because through not caring what other people thought about them, they themselves, felt free to pursue a life of serving God without worrying about any the perception of anyone else. I have to say that is extremely difficult to do. We are not Kotzker Hasidim, and it's very difficult to live a life free of wondering what the perception of others is, especially, by the way, when all of your classes are recorded on the computer and when we're constantly looking at Zoom and YouTube. What does it mean? I'll ask us now, especially during this time when we are consistently presenting ourselves, in a digital way. What does it mean to not care how others see us? And then when we're out in the world, at our jobs, at our work, with our family even, what does it mean to live a life where you're serving God, where you're trying to connect to something bigger without caring what others think about you? What choices would you make differently? What things would you do differently if you really felt like it was more important to live out that potential rather than try to conform to what you think the perceptions of others are? This is an important spiritual step, according to the Kotzker Rebbe, to ask those questions. Another teaching. A man asked the Kotzker rabbi to pray for him in order that his sons might study the Torah diligently. And the rabbi replied, "If your sons will see that you are a diligent student, they will imitate you. But if you neglect your own studies and merely wish your sons to study, the result will be that they will do likewise when they grow up. They will neglect the Torah themselves and desire that their sons do the studying." You get a sense here that the Kotzker Rebbe, did not have the highest opinion of the Jews of his time, but of his Chassids, definitely. But here, these later generations, he sees are maybe weaker spiritually than the earlier ones. And what he says here, to a man who comes and asks the Rebbe that his son should study, he says that's not how prayer works. If you want your sons to study, then you need to lead by example. Prayer does not work where one should be teaching in a way where they lead by example, he says. If you want your children to be compassionate, you can't pray for it, says the Kotzker Rebbe. You yourself have to be compassionate. If you want them to learn Torah, then you yourself have to go and learn Torah. There's no prayer that can do the work of the real teaching and example and leading by example that a parent does for their kids. you can't pray your kids act a certain way, which is unfortunate, especially during a temper tantrum. But what you can do, there is a method of changing their behavior, of actually the potential that you see in them, and that's by you yourself leading in that direction. I'll read 2 more teachings from the Kotzker Rebbe. Rebbe Mendel once asked a Hasid whether he had ever seen a wolf and had taken fright at the sight of that wolf. Said his student, "Indeed, Rabbi, I have seen one, and I was sorely afraid." The Rabbi continued to ask whether at the time he was conscious of the fright. And the Hasid answered, "Rabbi, in my great alarm, I did not even know that I was frightened. I could not even account for my own feelings." Said, "Even so should be the degree of one's fear of heaven. One must be so frightened and overcome with awe of the Holy One that one is not even conscious of the fact that one is afraid." How do we get to that level of connection with God? Remember, the goal is to serve God in love and fear. That's the idea. In fear, we don't mean literally fright, even though here we'll get to that in a second, because there is an element of literal fright here, but we mean a sense of reverence and awe at the fact that there is something much bigger and greater than us, bigger than we could ever imagine. Here he says the feeling of fright that one has when seeing a wolf, the feeling that their life could be taken from them in a moment, that they are mortal, that they are for a moment dust and ashes. That feeling of fear that one has when seeing a wolf, and they don't even realize they're afraid, but they're overcome with alarm, and they realize that they are human, and in their eyes they see that their life could be taken from them in a second. That's the level of awe and reverence that one should pray to God with. When somebody goes in a moment and says the Amidah, one's supposed to do it out of fear and love. Here, I believe the Kotzker Rebbe is saying in every moment, but let's just focus on prayer for a second. When we're actually asked to maintain a level of fear and love toward God the entire time that we're praying. What does it mean, to pray and to get past the idea of saying in your heart, I want to love God, I revere God, I'm in awe of God. One can will that to a certain extent. But Reb Mendel says the goal is to get past that, to the moment where you are standing in prayer, and you just feel in your heart that love toward God and that fear toward God. You see that your life is it's possible that God takes it in a moment. And you also feel that love that God has not yet. That God sustains us in this moment. It starts with a will. You can actually close your eyes and think about that bigger thing in the world. Call it the universe, call it God, call it divinity, call it Ribono Shel Olam, the master of the world, call it Hashem, call it Adonai, but you can will yourself to love that higher power. And then you can even will yourself to be afraid of that higher power, to be in awe of that higher power. But that's step one. And then he says the goal is to get to the point where you're standing in prayer and you're relating on such a deep level in the same way that the student was relating to his feelings of fear when he saw this wolf. that they were they just came from his soul. He didn't have to will them at all. He felt them on such a natural level. And so he says, Reb Mendel says, that's the goal with God too, that we get past the point of a kind of artificial love and fear, and to the point where we're feeling it without any will of that feeling whatsoever. And I'll read this last teaching. He says, addressing his students, he said, "Why all this rabble? Give me a score of young men who have not bowed the knee to Baal, and I will mount with them to the housetops. And there we will shout in a great voice, 'The Lord is God, the Lord is God.'" I would love to know the context of this teaching. You can imagine maybe all of his students kind of cacophonously talking to one another, maybe arguing about a particular point of Torah learning. Maybe they're having a disagreement about some halacha, and he says, "Stop for a second. I don't care what your position is and what your position is. What's important here is that we all are dedicated to God." That's what this line is. Give me a score of young men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Baal is the Midianite god who we learn about in the Torah, who the Israelites begin to worship in the desert and are punished for praying to another god. So says Reb Mendel, just give me students who are dedicated to God. I don't care what they know. I don't care if they know a lot. I don't care if they know a little. I don't care if they're rich. I don't care if they're poor. What's important in building our community is that we are all dedicated to the same purpose, which is serving God. And if we are, then united, our presence that God is in this world. It doesn't matter whether or not we agree. It doesn't matter whether or not we like each other, whether we came from the same social sphere even. What matters to Reb Mendel is to live in a community where everybody is dedicating themselves to the service of God, to achieving their potential in relationship with that higher power, and where they expect that the person next to them, even though they disagree, is trying also to live a life where they are continually connected to God. I think that sounds like a beautiful community to live in. And I hope for all of us that we do find people like that who we can be around, people who inspire us to live to our highest potential, people who keep us humble, and people who we can partner with and create a world where God is present, where our presence together raises the light in this world. So with that, thank you, Kevin, Yochev, and Elaine, my mom in Florida, for joining us tonight. What's exciting is we've gone now through this book, and we've now learned about most of the early Hasidic rabbis. In the next classes, we're going to jump into, I think we're going to spend some time with Levi Yitzchak Meberdichev. He was one of the first rabbis we learned about. He has beautiful teachings on the Parshiot that we're going to do in the coming weeks. Oh, Kevin, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that you joined us for the clothing shiur on Shavuot. Thank you for being there. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And now we go in to the month of Sivan. Shavuot is over. No more Omers to count. Only mitzvahs to do and a life of Torah to live. So with that, Shavuot Tov, everybody. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Bye.